This is the first part of a three-part series on developing online classes, and the next two are coming up in the next couple of weeks. And if you're on our listserv, you should see when those are. So we're going to talk about planning, backward design, objectives and modules, and developing a good syllabus, and basic teaching principles. And so that's what we're going to cover today. But one thing we know is that with an emphasis on planning your course, this webinar should help you organize your course for student-centered learning. We're actually going to share syllabus templates with you, or a link to our syllabus templates, so that you can have a great place to get started. And we'll also talk about some other tips and suggestions that we have that can save you some time in the planning process. The first thing we're going to talk about, and the first step that you want to think about, is planning for a good syllabus and planning a good course. And this is where designing your course actually begins, is planning and designing your curriculum. And the best thing in this process is actually writing everything out first and taking those steps in writing. Once you do that, it makes building in Blackboard and developing instructional content a whole lot easier. And in thinking about planning and developing curriculum, we use a process of a modified backward design process where we look at the end goals first. What is it that you want your students to be able to do by the time they finish your course? So let's talk a little bit, though, about some things you want to consider. When planning your course, as you know, there are a few things you want to think about first, and this actually will help you focus your design and will help me make choices in the process. To be honest, class size and unit specific accreditation requirements sometimes drive some of the choices you make when designing your class. And some things to consider are: how many weeks is your course going to be? Who and where are your students? Are they graduate students or undergraduates? Is this a Carolina core class, or are you in a professional program that like nursing or pharmacy, that has specific competencies that you must incorporate into your classes? How many students will you have in your class? Is it going to be 15 or 500? And also you want to consider, will you be teaching asynchronously or synchronously? Asynchronous courses are those that you never have a specified time that you meet with your students. You do have specific due dates for assignments, and students need to stay on track. However, you have no scheduled meeting time, as opposed to a synchronous course where you do have time where you each actually will meet in person and or online. There are benefits for both, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about backward design. And by nature, we tend to start planning our courses by creating a list of what we want our students to do, chapters that we want them to read, the assignments to complete, tests that they should take. But there's also a better way to stay focused on the student learning outcomes. And that's where we can focus our efforts better and create better learning experiences if we start with the end in mind. As I mentioned before, what should our students be able to do by the time they finish their course? Identify these objectives or these course outcomes first, then plan backwards. Starting at the end is the best way to develop your course, and this is what we call backward design. It's a concept credited to Wiggins and McTighe through their Understanding by Design model. And there are 3 steps essentially. And the first is to identify your desired results. These are your course outcomes or your course objectives. And the second is to determine acceptable evidence. How will you assess that your students have achieved these outcomes? And then 3, Plan learning experiences and instruction. What instructional materials do students to be able to successfully achieve these learning outcomes? And we're going to take a look at these in greater detail. As I mentioned, the first step in backward design is to determine your desired results. Students perform at a higher level when we articulate our expectations through these learning outcomes. In identifying results, you'll first want to pinpoint broad, higher order thinking course outcomes, then break them down into more manageable, lower level module outcomes, and scaffolding the learning as appropriate. Objectives need to be written in a measurable format and must be student-centered. When referring to measurable, we mean that you can assess whether the student has mastered the skill. And we often have used the action verbs identified in Bloom's taxonomy as we write those out. I know a lot of you have already attended numerous of our webinars and workshops, so we know you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. If not, there's also a action verb, Bloom's taxonomy action verb help document in the webinar document pod that you can download for yourself. And you can also Google Bloom's taxonomy to find a plethora of examples. The complexity of these objectives depends completely on your course level and the skill set of your students. Freshman isn't expected to be able to achieve the same outcomes as a doctoral student, for instance. Bloom's taxonomy in greater detail. And essentially, we have 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy that have corresponding action verbs. And an example for remembering at the lower level would be to have your students define key terms and techniques. Creating would be to design a project or to design a art installation. And after the first step of identifying your desired results, the next step is to determine how are you going to measure those learning outcomes. What will you accept as evidence that students are making progress towards the learning goals of your course? And how will you know that they're getting it? Measuring student progress toward the course outcomes is an important part of the learning process. And it begins with assessments. They enable you to determine how students are progressing. And authentic assessments are often the most effective. They can be formative or summative. Formative assessments measure student progress as they develop skills and abilities, while summative assessments summarize learning over a longer period of time. And these are often seen through midterm or final exams. It's recommended that you actually have a combination of formative as well as summative assessments. And when planning how you will collect evidence of learning, consider a variety of ways that students can demonstrate how they learn or what they have learned. For example, assessments could be your assignments. It could be a research project, discussion forums, quizzes and exams. You can have student projects completed in blogs or wikis. Students can create videos, and there's a plethora of other graded work that you can collect. Develop assessments that will really measure what you said the students should be able to do. And one good piece of advice that I've heard is that one thing to think about is never to assign anything that you personally would not want to grade. It's just a little tip that somebody mentioned when I first started working at CTE that I thought I would share with you. The second part of determining acceptable evidence is providing students with the grading criteria to let them know what your expectations are. It's considered best practice to provide students with detailed information on how their work will be assessed. A rubric is a scoring guide that outlines the criteria you'll use to evaluate student work. And they're often presented in a chart format, and it makes it easier for you when you're grading, especially in Blackboard, to click radio buttons with uh, feedback already built in to the rubric. Sometimes you'll see a developmental scale included, such as beginning, emerging, exemplary, or even novice, competent, or proficient. You can also just have a one criteria rubric. Rubrics actually help you, the instructor, to assess assignments consistently from student to student. They save time when you're grading. It helps you give effective feedback, and it can clarify your expectations. And if you have TAs, it will actually help them with grading. Now, on the flip side, rubrics help students understand your expectations and components of an assignment. They become more aware of their learning process. It improves their work through meaningful feedback, and it can provide meaningful peer review opportunities. Grading for all assignments should be clear and specific. Student self-assessments can occur when learners actually evaluate their own performance. This allows them to objectively reflect and critically evaluate their own skill development. It can help them identify gaps in their understanding and capabilities, and it can help them discern how to improve their performance. Finally, it can help them learn independently and think critically. Among other things, it helps students manage their own learning and development more independently. The more that you can help students become self-directed learners, the better off that they'll be. You can introduce students to the idea of using structured formative self-assessments during the learning process by having them complete activities such as a reflective blog about their learning and achievements, ask students structured questions about the quality of their submission and group contributions or class discussions, or use publisher-prepared online quizzes that give students immediate feedback on their performance. Finally, feedback, and that ties nicely into, I think, the part about that holistic grading. Feedback is so important, and what's mostly important, what you want to focus in on, is providing timely feedback. Rubrics and inline grading, which is what the assignment Dropbox allows you to do, are two tools built into Blackboard that can help you provide that feedback. Now, especially if you have large classes or a lot of discussion boards, summary announcements can help you save time and provide a big picture synopsis to the entire class as to what you're seeing. If students are missing certain components or missing certain topics, or if they're doing a really great job providing some sort of summary to the class at the end of the assessment grading period is a great technique that you can use. And we're moving on to the final step in backward design, which is planning the learning experience and instruction for your students. How will you teach what they need to be able to achieve your desired results? And this involves deciding what activities that students will do during the course and what resources and materials are needed for those activities. Be sure that the instructional materials you choose support the learning outcomes, and put your students yourself in the student's shoes. If you knew nothing about the subject, would the materials within the course be enough to enable you to meet the stated learning outcomes? Students have different tendencies when it comes to learning, so you'll want to also vary the information sources. Videos, which could be instructor created or from other sources. You'll want to have online active learning strategies incorporated. There are a lot of tools that are built within Blackboard that you can use to have that active learning take place in the online environment. what readings are included, and are there any other external resources? So we know you've already been teaching your class, so where do you begin? Where do you start if you've already planned out your course schedule? And we've covered some basic curriculum planning, and what we covered with the backward design is that foundational place to get started. If you've already been teaching your course and you already have content in a traditional face-to-face class, you can take that, plan out your materials for the online environment, and fill in any holes with what you're missing and organize your content so that it's easy for students to find and understand. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more now, and that's the concept of alignment and modules, which will help with the organization and developing content so that it's easy for students online to understand and find. Alignment is critical to course development. It's a component where your objectives, your assessments, your activities and content, and then finally your technology all are linked together and are working together. Measurable course and module learning objectives form the basis of alignment in a course. Objectives or outcomes determine what it is that you want your students to be able to do. Assessments measure that, and then your instructional materials, your activities are all working together to contribute to the accomplishment of the learning outcomes. And we're not going to spend a lot of time today on technology. One thing I have not mentioned is that there are instructional designers, as you know, at the CTE that can help you brainstorm any parts of these processes, and we're glad to work with you one-on-one. So let's talk a little bit now about modules. Because online students don't have the benefit sometimes of asking questions face-to-face, they sometimes do experience anxiety. And you can alleviate a lot of concern by making your course format simple to follow and easy to navigate. And one way to do this is to break down material into manageable chunks. And we refer to these as modules and the process as chunking. One recommendation is to organize your course into 14 modules based on having a full fall or spring semester. Then you can easily adjust these to any type of semester length, and students can complete multiple modules per week or one module per week. Within each module, you should provide a module overview, module objectives or outcomes, and then a task list. We also refer to this as an assignments list or a to-do list, and this includes all activities that a student will do within that module. You also want to, in a module, include all materials, all activities, any assessments, and also specify what's required and what's optional. Some faculty will also organize content into unit topics or unit overviews. Instead of using the word module, you do have a little bit of flexibility in that. But what you want to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that your learning objectives at the module or unit level align with and are more specific than the course level outcomes. And what's in a module? And I gave you a preview of that a second ago. Each module should contain everything that a student should do during a given period of time. Having everything in this one location will make it easy for them and for you to find work and to be able to work through what their assignments are. Each module should contain an overview, which is a brief description of what's covered or what students are expected to do in the module, what they can expect out of the unit. Module objectives are the competencies students will achieve. Your task list is the list of all instructional activities and assignments. And the actual instructional content. This includes the list of readings, your links to videos, your tests, your assignment drop boxes. If everything is together, it just makes navigation easier for students, and they don't have to worry about searching in multiple places for content. So this task list, when you're teaching online, you'll need to let your students know what they'll have to do each week or for each module. And this is an example on the screen of what this could look like. And this is essentially what Module 1 could look like. And if you think in terms of what it is that you're currently doing in your face-to-face classes and what you're having your students do, it's the same concept. Day 1, you're reading over the syllabus. You're having them go through and introduce themselves to each other. You're starting to build community that way. You're in an online environment. You might even ask them to complete a syllabus quiz, which are little tidbits that you want them to specifically know. For instance, when are tests due? What are your office hours? It could be something very simple, but it forces the student to actually go and read through the quiz. Again, if you're providing instructional lecture videos, we do recommend that you keep them to 20 minutes or less. If you have a multiple part lecture, and a lot of lectures do go a lot longer than 20 minutes, break them down into smaller chunks. And if at any time y'all have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat pod. I wanted to mention the need to plan for accessibility, and we're not going to focus a lot of time on accessibility at this time, but we wanted to make sure that you're aware that content online should be made accessible the day before classes get started. Everything that you put online should actually do that. I have somebody that asks for me to go back to the last slide. And so I'm not certain if this is the slide, Brigitte. And so Azar, you're also asking about the structural videos. So and one of the reasons why we chunk content and chunk materials is for the purposes of cognitive load with students. It's the same thing with videos. If you're creating a lecture video, it shouldn't be more than 15 to 20 minutes long. The attention span of students, research is showing us, is actually about 6 to 7 minutes. And really and truly, sometimes it's even 3 to 4 minutes. So taking that into consideration, in addition to technology issues such as buffering and streaming and whether or not students have high-speed internet, all of this comes into play and into the thought process of having short mini videos for a lecture. You can have you can have many videos in your course. And if you do have a longer lecture, when you're recording that or afterwards, break it down into smaller chunks. I hope that helps answer your question. And I'm moving on to back to accessibility. A lot of times you might not have students that have declared disabilities who might not register with the Student Disability Resource Office. In addition, it's important to caption and or provide transcripts for any videos that you create. This is beneficial to a lot of learners, including those who might be second language learners who can benefit from this accessible content. I also wanted to mention that Built within Blackboard is a tool called Blackboard Ally, and it converts your content into accessible formats, and it provides students your content in a variety of different formats. If you upload a Word document, for instance, it converts it into a PDF, it converts it into a HTML file, an audio file, as well as Braille. So Blackboard is doing a lot of the work for you to provide content in a variety of formats for your students. If you look at your course, when you upload content, you'll see these colored gauges. That's the tool at work. If you click on it, it will tell you how accessible that document actually is, and it will tell you if there's an issue, how to fix it. If you click right beside it, you should see something that looks like an A. If you click it, that's the Ally logo. It will actually allow you to download your content in a different format. And it actually still allows them to download your content in the original format that you have. So hopefully, it sounds like I'm breaking up. Sorry you're having some difficulties. I hope everybody else is able to hear me clearly. Awesome, thank you. So if you don't mind, just check your connections real quick. Thank you. So any questions about modules or task lists or accessibility before we move on? How do we provide captions and transcripts if we assign students to make videos? Jacqueline, that's a really great question. The intent right now is that we provide accessible content for students. If you know that a student has, if you have students with disabilities in your class, that's definitely the expectation then that all work is made accessible. Within YouTube, you have the closed captioning feature too. If you recommend students use and create videos through that, you can also ask students to write out their script in advance before they get started in recording, or provide a written transcript. So those are a couple of different suggestions. In terms of videos, you either have to provide captions or you have to provide a transcript. And is live captioning available? Within the latest version of PowerPoint, if you're using PowerPoint, live transcriptioning can be turned on. It's now an accessibility feature within PowerPoint. And when you put your PowerPoint in full display, it actually writes what's being said at the bottom of the screen. And how does that work for online live discussions? It's actually a very good feature. I've used it for the first time myself one day this week, and it's very accurate. I was using a different web conferencing tool though. I was in a Zoom meeting at the time, and the artificial intelligence behind it is getting better and better. It does help if you pronounce and enunciate clearly, so that actually is beneficial. And what would that be required of? So Sabra is asking if captioning is required of student content in the class. I should please pop in if I'm saying anything incorrectly, but at this time, it's not the expectation unless you have other students in the class that are in need of it. So, and I'm thinking on the top of my head here too that it's a good best practice if you can start having your students do that. One of my teachers actually had one of the faculty members I'm working with had her students write out their scripts in advance as part of the assignment before they actually start recording. So she has them upload not only the video, but also if they do not use YouTube, they upload the Word document. That's right. You can make this a requirement. So Mohammed's asking or stating recorded lectures and transcript workshops offered by. Yes, the Office of Distributed Learning will help faculty members to record lectures and transcribe and provide accessible video formats, caption their files to. Rob Grookett, Jeff Sort are fantastic. I highly recommend that you reach out to them to seek their services. They can teach you how to do it yourself, or depending upon their workload and your turnaround time, they can even do it for you. They have student workers that will help clean up videos, and they have a workflow. There's a product out there called Otter AI. It's a website that will allow you to upload a video, and it will provide a transcript file for you. YouTube will also allow you to, if you upload your video to YouTube, turn on closed captions, and it will produce a transcript for you. If you actually write out your script in advance, which is actually best practice, it actually helps you stay on script, stay on point, so that you're not moving in a lot of different directions. Some people are really great extemporaneous speakers and stay on topic. Unfortunately, I'm not necessarily one of them. I can ramble, and I write out a script whenever possible in advance. So with, and Ed's making the point, you can, and you do need to review your YouTube captioning. You're absolutely right. If you have a pre-written script, you can actually upload it directly into, you can copy and paste directly into YouTube, and then it will automatically sync that for you. So any other questions about this before we move on to some good basic teaching principles? And what we know, and what you know to be true, is that good teaching is good teaching. And that's the very bare bones, and that's what's going to translate a good class, a good face-to-face class, to a good online class. And there are some teaching principles, the 7 principles of good undergraduate education proposed by Chickering and Gampson, that not only translate well to the face-to-face environment, but are also really good principles to continue in the online environment. And one thing that we know is that research shows that communication is vitally important for student success in the online learning format. The university has adopted quality assurance standards developed by the Quality Matters organization, and these standards for online learning call for thoughtfully planned opportunities for interaction. It's interesting to note that 5 of Chickering and Gampson's 7 principles actually relate directly to interaction in the learning process. And there are 3 types that you should infuse into every course: student to faculty interaction, student to student, and student to content. Student to faculty interaction is extremely important. This is where you as the teacher are constantly present, or this is facilitating the learning process. Teacher immediacy was a strong predictor of participant satisfaction in the virtual environment. One great way to have this immediacy is to send a weekly email message to students that outline the objectives and tasks for the week, to give them reminders. When I've taught online, I like to also send random emails with subject-related news articles that they might find interesting. And as for student email, you should respond to students in the time frame that you promised in your syllabus. With student-to-student interaction, we know that students who feel a sense of community rather than isolation in an online course are better prepared to become active learners. Collaborative learning experiences can enhance critical thinking and lead to greater personal satisfaction as well. For starters, ask students to perform a self-introduction. This can occur through a traditional discussion board. You can use the Flipgrid tool or VoiceThread, or some other tool that you incorporate into your class. This actually sets the stage for friendly and ongoing interaction. Participation in discussion board interactions should be made required, and typically you should assign points for any meaningful interaction. Before we move on to active learning, I wanted to mention student-to-content interaction. And there's no doubt your students will engage in course content by completing weekly reading assignments or viewing your lectures or taking exams, for instance. You might also want to ask them to write weekly news entries into a personal wiki, create a reflective blog, or even complete mini weekly quizzes. This will actually help you determine how students are doing in your class and makes them accountable for actually reading through and learning content. You can also consider giving students beyond the classroom assignments that encourages them to practice or apply the skills that they've been learning. You know, and one thing that we know is that learning is not a spectator sport. Connecting the topic to experience and practical application is key, and this is where online active learning strategies come into play. You can actually help encourage students to talk about what they're learning and write about it and relate it back to past experiences as part of an experiential learning opportunity, but also that reflection helps, as you know, drive home that learning. Giving prompt feedback is key and essential to a class. Lack of feedback is the #1 complaint from online students. Students need appropriate feedback on performance to benefit from their courses. And especially at the beginning, students need help in assessing their knowledge and competence. They'll also need chances to reflect on what they've learned and assess their own skills. So Ed, you're asking, you suggested assigning points for any meaningful interaction. Do you recommend assigning points for participation in online discussions? I do. I really do, especially a lot of times just in face-to-face classes, students will do the minimal amount of work unless there are, or not do work unless there are points assigned to it. But the level of points can vary depending upon what it is. For instance, you can have students earn a larger number of points for posting their comments, and then only a few points for their responses to classmates. And Azar, you're asking about workshops that cover more topics related to student interactions. We don't have, and as Aisha is typing, we don't have specific workshops related to that. However, we do have a lot of workshops related to that are off topics of active learning, and anything that we have coming up soon, I'll try and highlight and have Leanne send out an email to y'all at the end of the day. And Fred, you're asking, how can we provide replies to discussion boards to specific students one-to-one without posting them to the whole class? There's a way, Fred, to either reply all or reply directly to a student, but within Blackboard, you can also send students emails directly and individually. And if you're if you need some help with that, reach out to CTE and we'll walk you through that. The next good principle is time on task. And learning to use time well is critical for students as well as everybody else. And you can set them up for success by allocating realistic amounts of time for projects and assignments. And pace yourself also. Don't make everything due at the end or you'll be loaded down in grading. Have them spaced out specifically throughout the semester. Emphasizing the importance of holding high standards for academic excellence is also key. Talk to your students about study skills, the honor code, plagiarism. provide grading criteria or rubrics. What is it that a student has to do to make an A on an assignment? And one useful suggestion too is to provide examples of good work. If you want them to write an essay, provide an example of an essay that meets high quality standards. If you have them work on a project, give them an example of what a good project looks like, and that can help spur their creativity, and it can help them understand what it is you're expecting from them. And finally, respecting diverse talents and ways of learning. And there are many roads to learning, as you know, and everyone learns differently. Students need the opportunity to show their talents and learn in ways that work for them. One thing we haven't really covered in this session is the concept of universal design for learning. And it actually takes into consideration the diverse needs of students. And it's one thing that you might want to look into. The next thing I wanted to mention is that CTE has a master course template in Blackboard, and we also have online course syllabi templates that you can use to help things get started. A CTE designer can actually copy our course template into a sandbox for you or into your live class. It's organized in 3 sections. A start here section with information about your course, how to get started, it will contain your syllabus as well as information about you. Second section is your learning content. Your instructional materials are organized into learning modules. The third section are just the resources that you provide to students, such as a grade center, email links to the email tool, Blackboard Collaborate. Aisha has just shared out the syllabi template web page with you. If you don't mind clicking on that to get started. It contains every single required section from the provost office that the provost office requires for syllabi, plus every single recommendation from Quality Matters. You'll find that online syllabi are a lot longer than your traditional face-to-face class syllabi. Don't be daunted by this. It is very helpful to students to provide everything in writing to them up front. It will actually help you have less questions, other than the millions of times that students always ask, and the answer is that's in your syllabus. So if you want to use our services, you do not give up ownership of your content. If you do receive one of our CTE teaching grants, there's some expectation that you will share that out with other colleagues. However, just using our services and our resources definitely is free to you. All of your content is still your own. And you have nothing to worry about in those terms. Lauren has mentioned that having a FAQ page is really helpful to deal with questions. And definitely that's incorporated into that piece of the course template that we have. So Eric is asking if we record lectures, do we still own the content? Definitely so. Again, if you're getting a university grant, there might be some different expectations. But anything that you produce in this course is your own. Any other questions related to that? I mentioned Quality Matters a few minutes ago, and the university back in 2013 adopted the Quality Matters standards for higher education. And these are best practices designed by faculty who've taught online from across the country. And we adopted them and actually added on some more specific accessibility features. And more accessible, more standards related to accessibility. If you would like a copy of those, please let us know and we can send those to you. Actually, they're in the quality assurance standards document is in the webinar document download file if you'd like to download that for yourself. But it's your designer, if you're working with a designer, can help you design your course geared towards those standards. And like I said, our templates have a lot of those standards already built into them. So that actually brings us to the end of today's session. And our contact information is now on display. If you'd like an instructional design consultation, please feel free to email us at cte@sc.edu or visit our website for to fill out an online consultation form. Aisha's email and my email are up on the screen too.